Most gardeners who compost kitchen scraps think they're feeding the soil, but what they're often feeding instead is rats, mice, and every scavenger in the neighborhood. Open compost piles, buried raw scraps, and poorly managed bins attract rodents fast, and once they associate your garden with food, the problem doesn't stay in the compost. They start hitting seedlings, roots, and even irrigation lines. If you're serious about growing food and not running a rodent cafeteria, subscribe to the Husbandry channel now, because this kind of practical, field-tested method saves crops, time, and frustration. The real issue isn't scraps themselves, it's how they break down. Raw decomposition smells like food to rodents. Fermentation, on the other hand, creates acidic conditions that mask food scents and discourage scavengers. This is why traditional fermented scrap methods, often similar to bokashi systems, have worked for centuries in small farms where pest pressure was constant. When done properly, fermentation doesn't rot scraps, it preserves them biologically. That distinction matters because preserved organic matter integrates into soil differently than decayed waste. This is the fermented scrap method that consistently keeps rodents away. I ferment kitchen scraps using a bran inoculated with lactic acid bacteria. The simplest working ratio I've tested repeatedly is about 1 tablespoon of inoculated bran per 2 cups of chopped food scraps. The scraps go into an airtight bucket, pressed down firmly to remove air pockets, then sealed. Oxygen is the enemy here because aerobic decay produces the smells rodents detect. Within about 2 weeks, in warm conditions, sometimes 3 if temperatures drop, the scraps turn slightly pickled rather than rotten. The smell shifts to sour-sweet, almost like silage. That's exactly what you want. You know, people often bury raw scraps and then wonder why rodents show up. Fermented scraps, though, behave quite differently in soil. Once they're buried about 15 to 20 centimeters deep in a garden bed, they break down quickly without broadcasting those tempting food odors. I've buried fermented material in raised vegetable beds, orchard rows, and even container gardens, and honestly, I haven't had any rodent digging, while nearby raw compost piles got hit repeatedly. The acidity at first suppresses pests, and then soil microbes take over decomposition really rapidly. Raised beds especially benefit from this approach. They dry out faster and lose organic matter quicker than in-ground plots. Fermented scraps act almost like a slow-release organic amendment, which is rather handy. When I prep a 1.2 meter by 2.4 meter raised bed, I typically trench a narrow channel down the center, incorporate about 3 to 4 kilograms of fermented scraps, cover it all with soil, and let it settle for 2 weeks before planting. Leafy greens planted afterward consistently show deeper color and stronger growth, compared to beds fed only with finished compost. There's also a moisture management advantage most people overlook. Fermented organic matter improves water retention while still allowing drainage. In dry climates or raised planters, that really does matter. I've cut irrigation frequency noticeably using fermented scrap amendments, especially with crops like tomatoes, peppers, and brassicas that prefer steady moisture. That stability reduces stress, which directly affects yield quality. So, hydroponic growers aren't excluded from this either. Now, while you wouldn't add fermented scraps directly to hydro systems, the liquid byproduct, often called bokashi tea, can be diluted heavily and used as a microbial supplement. I filter it carefully and dilute, roughly 1 part liquid to 100 parts water before adding to hydroponic reservoirs. Used sparingly, it stabilizes microbial balance around roots. Lettuce and herbs tend to show improved vigor, though you have to monitor pH because the liquid is naturally acidic. The biggest mistake gardeners make is overfilling fermentation containers. Compaction matters. Air pockets create partial rot zones, which attract pests again. I always chop scraps small, press firmly, and drain any excess liquid regularly. That consistency keeps fermentation stable. Temperature also matters. Around 20 to 30 degrees Celsius is ideal. Another common misconception is that fermentation replaces composting completely. It doesn't. Fermented scraps still finish breaking down in soil. Think of fermentation as pre-digestion rather than full composting. The advantage is speed, odor control, and nutrient preservation. Some growers bury fermented scraps directly, others add them to traditional compost piles to accelerate breakdown. Both approaches work, but rodent resistance is strongest when scraps stay sealed until burial. Crop response tends to surprise people. Plants don't just get nutrients, they benefit from increased microbial diversity and organic acids that stimulate root development. I've seen improved transplant success, especially with cucumbers, eggplants, and leafy greens. Flavor often improves too, particularly with tomatoes and herbs, likely because of balanced micronutrient availability. There are, trade-offs worth acknowledging honestly. Fermentation requires containers, inoculated bran, and a bit of planning. You can't just toss scraps casually like traditional composting, but the reduction in pest pressure, odor control, and nutrient retention usually outweighs the extra step. One overlooked benefit is urban garden suitability. Small backyard growers, balcony gardeners, and intensive raised bed setups benefit most because, rodent pressure tends to be higher in dense areas. Sealed fermentation systems make food scrap recycling viable even in tight spaces. And because nutrients stay concentrated, smaller gardens see proportionally bigger gains. Soil health over time is where this method really proves itself. Repeated fermented scrap incorporation increases organic matter, microbial activity, and nutrient cycling efficiency. Soil texture improves. Crops establish faster. Pest outbreaks become less frequent. It's not instant magic, but season over season the cumulative effect is obvious. The deeper lesson here is about working with biology, not against it. Fermentation uses microbial processes to stabilize nutrients before soil application. That mirrors natural cycles where organic matter transitions gradually rather than, abruptly decomposing. When gardeners align with those cycles, inputs decrease and resilience increases. If you want fewer rodent problems, stronger soil, and better harvest quality without relying on synthetic shortcuts, fermented scrap management is honestly one of the most practical upgrades you can make. And if this kind of grounded, experience-driven growing knowledge helps you produce better food, subscribe to the Husbandry channel and, share this video with another serious grower. Good harvests spread when practical knowledge spreads, and the more growers who understand soil biology, the better food we all grow.